I would hesitate to recommend this book because of its sheer weirdness. I've seen... Hey everyone, hi, welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today I am making this video because I recently put up a reel or a short. I think they're called YouTube shorts, the little 1-minute videos, in which I said that these are some books I love, but I hesitate to recommend. And I got a couple of comments saying they wanted a couple of comments from you all saying you all wanted a full discussion on this topic. And so this is me delivering a full discussion on the topic of books I love but hesitate to recommend. If you are new to my channel, then hi, welcome. I'm Shelly. What an interesting video for you to start with. And if you like the vibes and you like discussing books, then I would encourage you to subscribe. Stick around, and without any further rambling on, let's go ahead and get into the meat of this video. Some context about my hesitation to recommend books. I know and have been surrounded by and have people close to me. So I know folks, I know those people, there are people out there, some of whom I know, that don't want to read about certain topics for one reason or another. There is a filtering, and I think we all do this. I know that I definitely do this with my own reading, that there are certain topics, there are certain subjects that I find tremendously difficult to read about or to consume, especially the way that things are written. I can just be very aware that even for myself and for others, because I have people in my life, that there are certain topics that one would not want to read about. And I am very respectful of that. I'm like, if you don't want to read that, then that's fine. Like, I don't want to tell you what you're going to like. I don't want to push anything on anybody. The way when people tell me that I should read something, or that if the word should is in a recommendation, I've gotten better about it over the years, but that is like the word in which a wall goes up. I don't like people telling me what I'm going to like or dislike. Again, I've really grown in this area, but little booktuber Shelly a couple of years ago, when someone's like, you know, you should read that because it's a classic. I mean, immediately I'll be like, I'm not going to read that, even if it is a classic. And then, you know, it's like, I've gotten a lot gentler about that. But I also just don't like to should anybody. I don't want to should anyone. I don't also want to recommend something that I know is not going to work for the reader. If I know a reader is sensitive to a lot of cussing, and actually we'll get to that in a moment, but like they just don't like a lot of language in their reading. I know a couple people like that. It's something that they just can't really get past. It really sours the read in their own like hearts and minds, and they just don't want to read something that's full of cussing. So sometimes I know that a book is phenomenal. I loved it. I thought it was amazing, and it's full of cussing. And the first one, and that's a good place to start. The first one would be The Trees by Percival Everett. Now, I love this book. This book is about a double homicide that happens in Money, Mississippi, and the Money, Mississippi, the MBI, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, goes down to investigate the murder of what happened. And it's a weird, brutal, odd murder. And the two guys that are investigating are absolutely hilarious. The chapters are ridiculously short. The pacing is rapid, quick. And there is some poetic justice in here that made me squeal. Like, I just love this book so much. Super duper duper clever, really great banter. However, for the reasons I just mentioned, the murders, it's about murder. It's not even like a cozy murder mystery. I mean, it is brutal. It is brutal, you all. For that alone, I would hesitate to recommend that, because if I know that somebody cannot handle brutality in books, like that's just not what they want to have in their lives. Again, I'm very respectful of that. So I would be like, I love the trees, but I don't think you will if you don't want to read about brutality. I also know that a lot of the banter in this and a lot of there is language. There's like quite a bit of language, if I remember correctly, in this book. There's a lot of F-bombs. There's a lot going on. And though I felt like it very much fit the scenario, the setting, it's well done, it's not out of place, it's not gratuitous. Like, I understand that. I also know that there are readers out there that when there is cussing, like, they don't like it. It's like, it really sours the experience for them. And so for that, it would be hard I would hesitate to recommend this to just anybody. Now, if I know that cussing doesn't bother you, that you are into like racial, if you have a curiosity about racial issues, social justice is something that really piques your interest, you like wicked sharp banter and brutality is not something that gets in amongst you and gives you nightmares, then I would say pick this up. It's brilliant. It's amazing. I love this. This is one of my favorite reads of last year, and wow. But that is the reason why I would hesitate to recommend The Trees by Percival Everett. I've seen several book reviews on this book that have this sentiment in it. It's weird. I don't know what I just read. It's cuckoo's bananas crazy, wild, off the walls. That's what I said. It's weird, and I liked it, and I could not tell you why I liked it. It's a weird one. And for that, along with the cussing and the sort of weird, wild bananas, the odd violence in this, I mean, but it's like campy violent. It's just odd. It's Bunny by Mona Awad, y'all. It's a weird book. And I think you have to be okay with a lot. One of which is that language has to not bother you in reading. I am not bothered by the language in this book because it feels like it fits with the characters in the scenario. It's also just a weird, odd, unhinged, surreal, just cuckoo's bananas crazy, off the wall read. And I loved it. I was like here for it. It was like popcorn is not the right thing. It was like candy. The candy's not the right thing. It was just like, it felt like candy to my brain. Like I couldn't stop eating it. It was so interesting and gripping and fascinating and odd and weird and unhinged. And I loved it. And I know that partly for the weirdness and the unlikable characters and the language and the odd violence that's sort of campy but also just violent, that for all of those reasons and the male-female dynamics, which is if you know, you know kind of thing, if you know, you know, it's just weird. And for that, I loved it. Like, those are the reasons why I love the book. And I understand that those are the exact reasons why somebody would hate the book. And when people say, I didn't like it, it was weird, it was odd, it didn't work for me, there was like a lot of language in it, I would be like, well, yeah. I can totally be on board with the fact that you did not like it, and it totally makes sense to me. No arguments here, no problem. I get it. It's a weird one. And for that weirdness, I loved it. But also for that weirdness, I could see why somebody wanted. Probably the easiest book in this pile for me to say that I loved it and I would really hesitate to recommend it. And it is for the brutality, like the truly dark nature of the book and how brutal it is. And it's one of those books where I loved it, and sometimes, at least especially when I first read it, I almost regretted reading it. But I loved it. It was very strange, and here, we'll get into it as to why. It's A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Oh my goodness. I'm dropping things left and right. So A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara tells the story of 4 friends, and slowly she starts to focus in on a single group member of the four friends named Jude. And Jude has a really messed up background. Like if I cussed on my channel, I would say a different word for that, but I don't cuss. So he has a messed up background. I'm talking child abuse to the absolute worst one could possibly even imagine of child abuse. And the interesting thing is that when I went into this book, I went into it totally blind. I had no clue what it was about. I had no idea that it was known as like a really sad book, that people cried with it. I had no idea. So I picked this up on a recommendation. A book, not even a booktuber, a beauty YouTuber said that this was one of her favorite books of all time, and that it really helps explain the life that people have that suffer with mental health and why they suffer from that mental health, and like this sort of inner lives that we sometimes never know. And in this, we get Jude's inner life, like what happened to him as a child, what happened to him as a young adult, what happened to him as somebody who is navigating their life in their 20s. And it is quite literally the darkest thing I have ever read. And it was also written in this immensely mesmeric and cinematic style that it unfolded utterly perfectly. The pacing was perfect, the characters were perfect, the way she's getting her point across is all show, no telling. Like she's showing you everything about Jude's life as to why it was terribly, awfully, tragically, incredibly, but also wonderfully brutal. The thing is that like as the person that I am now, I mean, I right after I read this, I was like, I don't even know if I am glad that I read that. I mean, it's a 5-star read if I started my books. It's like an amazing read. It's now one of my favorite books of all time, and I don't think I'll ever read it again because the content is just too difficult. But when I was reading about it, I couldn't stop talking about it. Poor Ted had to hear about it for like several weeks. I couldn't put certain scenes down. Like when I was reading them, I couldn't put the book down during a certain scene. Like I had to read it all the way through, and it had me in its grips. My full imagination, my full attention, my full self was devoted to this book for like 3 weeks, and it was amazing. Or like 2 whole weeks. I just loved it. And I also know that some people don't want to have this kind of book in their lives. And I actually know that a friend of mine picked this up after I read it, and she was like, the writing is beautiful and I loved it, but if somebody was going to say, I'm going to pick that up, she would say, no, run in the opposite direction. And so it's this weird thing because it's like, as much as I love it, I have a really hard time recommending this to people because it is truly the most brutal thing I've ever read. And it's so beautiful. The last two, they are nuanced. So I will start with Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse. So Virginia Woolf as a writer is brilliant. She is incredibly smart. She has this really lovely stream of consciousness style writing that for the most part, besides her nonfiction, what I've read of her is she always has a sense of stream of consciousness in her writing. And the reason why I would not recommend To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf is because it does have some of that stream of consciousness writing. It is very beautiful. It essentially follows the family through the passage of time. Section 2 is quite possibly one of the most beautiful things I've ever read in my entire life. And I know that some people don't like stream of consciousness writing. And I would say that if you were going to read something by Virginia Woolf, then I would say for literature and like the through line of literature and the history of literature, then I would read the thing that she is most well known for. Like there are other books out there that are just so much more pivotal to like our reading culture and lives by Virginia Woolf that are more hard-hitting and more sort of everything that like why read To the Lighthouse when you could read Mrs. Dalloway? So I love To the Lighthouse. I think it's brilliant. But on the off chance that you've never quite read Stream of Consciousness writing, on the off chance that you've never read Virginia Woolf, I would not say to start here, because if there's one Woolf book you should read, it should be Mrs. Dalloway. If there's one fiction book, Woolf book that you should read, it should be Mrs. Dalloway, because this is like full stream of consciousness, full on, and it's super important to the canon of literature, so to speak. Not that I even necessarily believe in the canon, but it's super pivotal to writing styles and to literature and the history of literature. And so it's hard for me to say, like, I love this book. I think it's beautiful. In some ways, I like it more than Mrs. Dalloway. But it's like, if there is this chance that you've never read Woolf and that you were thinking about trying her and you're really turned off by her style, I would say that if you get through a few pages, it should be the few pages of Mrs. Dalloway. And if you wanted to read like her most, quite possibly her most, like, you know, world-changing book, like, you should read not To the Lighthouse, but A Room of One's Own, because that was just so pivotal to literature. If you're like, I only have 2 Virginia Woolf books in my reading life, and that's it, then I would say, please read Mrs. Dalloway and please read A Room of One's Own. Those are like her most impactful, most hard-hitting, most pivotal works, and you're just doing yourself a favor as a reader and as a person who reads, which is a reader, if you just read those books rather than messing around with some of her lesser known works, like To the Lighthouse, even though it was so beautiful. It was really beautiful. I'm just like, but just read her most famous stuff. Like, it's worth it. It's worth it. So, you know, I just wanted to put that out there. So it's not necessarily that I would hesitate super hard to recommend it. I would just say, like, maybe don't start there. And it's another book that I would say don't start there / avoid it if you really don't like bleak things. And Hannah, of Hannah's books, you were one of the people who asked me to do this discussion. And one of the reasons why I hesitate to recommend it is because of you, a little bit. Like, you have a contribution to my thinking on this book. And the book is about 2 very unlikable characters written by the queen. Like, she is a queen, and it is Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton. Now, this is a very short book, and this tells the story of Ethan Frome, who it's dark, y'all. That's one of the reasons why I wouldn't recommend it. Now, Hannah from Hannah's book said that she read this in one day when she was an older teenager, and she like, it really turned her off to Edith Wharton's writing, and she thought these were like 2 of the most unlikable characters in history at the time, for her at the time. And so I have thought about that. And there are very unlikable characters in here. The characters in here are wretched, and I feel like that's the point. And I also think Edith Wharton, and this really put Hannah off to Edith Wharton, and that's such a shame, because what a beautiful book that she wrote that is amazing is The Age of Innocence. I mean, so good. Also, The House of Mirth, amazing. Like, so good, so beautiful, so engaging, so wonderful. And it's a lot of, like, please don't start here. I would say, look, y'all, don't start with Ethan Frome. Don't start with Ethan Frome, because it is like one of the darkest, well, I just talked about A Little Life, but it is one of the bleakest books I've read in a long time. A Little Life is like emotionally dark. This is just bleak. You're like, but I really liked it for that. You know, like, I really love this book because it was like bleak and it had a twist that I didn't know Edith Wharton could go there. And it was kind of amazing that she surprised me so much, but man, it's bleak. And then it's like, if you read this and you're like, oh, Edith Wharton, I don't know if I could do her. I don't know if I could read anything more by her. I'd be like, no, wait a second. There's Age of Innocence and The House of Mirth, and they're both amazing, and they're so worth your time, and so, you know, that's it for Edith Wharton. So a couple of them that are more like, let me set this down. A couple of books that are more about like, maybe don't start with those, like Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse and Edith Wharton's Ethan Frome. It's like, maybe don't start there. If you decide that you like these writers, then, you know, after you've read some of their more famous works because they're more broadly appealing, then maybe dive into some of their more nuanced and less popular works, and less popular for a reason, because some of them, they're bleak. And then also, there are just books for which I know that people won't want to have that kind of content in their lives. And I don't fault anyone for that. I completely understand, because I am that way about certain things. And though I'm very willing to try new genres, new things, I'm willing to sort of push my own boundaries, there are times where I do regret, I do regret having taken that risk, because I feel like I crossed an internal boundary that I didn't want to cross. And I never want somebody to do that for themselves, to really regret reading something that they know they shouldn't have read, that they feel like it was not good for their spirit. And I want to be very respectful of that. And so those are 5 books that I love, but I also hesitate to recommend. What books do you love, but you're like, I don't know if I can recommend them to everybody, or like that you just hesitate to recommend? I would love to know. I shared, it's your turn. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here and spending this time with me. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all in my next one. Bye.